Right now, somewhere out there, a person with real talent, real potential, and real dreams is quietly wasting their life. Not through some dramatic failure, not through a single bad decision that ruins everything overnight. It's happening in a way so small, so ordinary, so disguised as normal daily life that they don't even notice it's happening. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because if it looked like waste, if it felt like waste, they'd stop doing it. But it doesn't. It feels like relaxing. It feels like being realistic. It feels like just how life is. Before we go any further, if you want more videos like this one, honest, practical, and built to actually change how you live your days, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I'm about to walk you through are 10 habits that quietly drain years out of people's lives. And I bet almost everything that at least 2 or 3 of them are living inside your daily routine right now without you even realizing it. Jim Rohn spent decades studying the difference between people who built extraordinary lives and people who spent decades working just as hard, wanting it just as badly, and somehow ending up nowhere close to where they hoped to be. And what he found, again and again, wasn't some rare catastrophic mistake. It was a set of small, repeated, almost invisible habits. He described it simply: failure is nothing more than a few errors in judgment, repeated every day. Not one huge error, a few small ones, repeated so consistently that they quietly compound into a wasted decade. And then another one, until a person wakes up at 50, wondering where their life went. Today, we're going to expose 10 of those hidden habits, not the obvious ones like addiction or laziness that everyone already recognizes as a problem. The sneaky ones, the ones that look like normal, responsible, even admirable behavior on the surface, while slowly draining your time, your energy, and your potential underneath. By the end of this, you're going to look at your own daily routine with completely different eyes. Let's start with the first hidden habit, and it might be the most common one of all: staying busy instead of being productive. Here's the trap. Busyness feels like progress. Your calendar is full. Your inbox is buzzing. You fall into bed exhausted every night, and exhaustion feels like proof that you worked hard. But here's the uncomfortable question almost nobody asks themselves. Hard at what? A huge percentage of the tasks that fill up a typical day, the meetings that could have been an email, the errands that could have waited, the constant putting out of small fires, have absolutely nothing to do with the goals that actually matter to that person's life. They're just noise, dressed up to look like work. And the danger is that this kind of busyness is comfortable. It gives you an excuse. As long as you're busy, you never have to face the harder question of whether you're actually moving toward anything. Because you can always say, I don't have time right now. I'm slammed. Meanwhile, years pass. The busyness never stops. And the big goals, the ones that actually required focused, uninterrupted effort, never get touched. Because there is always something smaller and louder demanding attention first. The second hidden habit is closely related, and it's this: constantly consuming instead of creating. Think about how much information the average person takes in during a single day. Videos, articles, social feeds, endless scrolling, hour after hour of other people's thoughts, other people's lives, other people's opinions flowing into your mind. None of it feels wasteful in the moment. It feels like staying informed, staying entertained, staying connected. But here's what's actually happening underneath. Every minute spent consuming is a minute not spent creating, building, or working towards something of your own. And the human brain has a strange quirk. Consuming feels almost identical to producing in the moment, because both activities keep your mind occupied and give you little hits of stimulation. But at the end of the day, one person has built something, written something, made progress on something, and the other person has simply absorbed a river of content that will be forgotten within a week. Multiply that gap by a year, and you start to understand why 2 people with the same intelligence and the same opportunities can end up in completely different places, purely based on how they spent their evenings. Which brings us to the third hidden habit: chasing comfort instead of growth. This one is sneaky because comfort isn't inherently bad. Rest and ease have their place. The problem is when comfort becomes the default setting for every decision, taking the easier option at work instead of the challenging one that would actually develop a new skill, avoiding the hard conversation because it's uncomfortable, even when that conversation is exactly what the relationship or the situation needs. Staying in a job, a routine, a version of yourself that no longer fits, simply because change requires friction and comfort doesn't. Growth, by definition, requires discomfort. It requires doing things you're not naturally good at yet, saying things that might be poorly received, trying something that might not work. Every time comfort wins that internal argument, it feels like a small, harmless choice. But comfort compounds too, just like discipline does, except in the opposite direction. A life built entirely on choosing the comfortable option, day after day, quietly narrows over time until the person living it wakes up one day in a life that feels small, safe, and strangely unsatisfying, without ever being able to point to the exact moment it happened. The fourth hidden habit is one of the most emotionally costly on this entire list: comparing your life to everyone else's highlight reel. This has always existed in some form, but it has never been easier or more constant than it is right now. Within seconds, you can see someone else's vacation, someone else's promotion, someone else's seemingly perfect family, someone else's body, someone else's success, curated and polished for public display. And here's the trap: you're comparing your full, complicated, behind-the-scenes reality, your doubts, your bad days, your unfinished goals, to someone else's carefully selected highlight reel. It's not even a fair comparison, and yet it happens automatically, dozens of times a day, chipping away at self-worth one scroll at a time. The hidden cost isn't just the temporary sting of feeling behind. It's the way this habit quietly redirects your energy away from your own path and towards someone else's, as you unconsciously start shaping your goals around what looks impressive to others instead of what actually matters to you. A life built to look good to an audience is a very different life than one built with intention. And most people who fall into this habit don't even realize which one they've been building. The fifth hidden habit is one that hides especially well because it disguises itself as humility: waiting until you feel ready. So many people are sitting on a goal, a business idea, a creative project, a relationship they want to pursue, a conversation they need to have, telling themselves they'll act once they feel more prepared, more confident, more qualified. It sounds responsible. It sounds careful. But here's the truth almost nobody tells you: confidence doesn't usually come before action. It comes from action. The people who eventually feel ready are, in almost every case, the people who started before they felt ready and built that confidence through the messy, uncertain process of doing the thing anyway. Waiting to feel ready isn't caution. It's often just fear wearing a more socially acceptable disguise. And the tragedy of this habit is that the waiting can stretch on indefinitely, because that feeling of readiness that people are holding out for often never fully arrives. There's always one more thing to learn, one more risk that feels too big, one more reason it might be smarter to wait just a little longer. Meanwhile, the goal sits untouched year after year, not because it was impossible, but because permission to begin was outsourced to a feeling that was never going to show up on its own. The sixth hidden habit is one Jim Rohn talked about often, and it's this: neglecting the slow, unglamorous work of self-education. Once people finish school, a huge number of them quietly close the book on learning. In the most literal sense, they tell themselves they already know enough to get by, and getting by becomes the ceiling of their ambition without them ever consciously choosing it. But the world doesn't stand still. Industries shift. Skills become outdated. New opportunities emerge that require knowledge the person simply never went out and got. The habit of neglecting self-education doesn't announce itself as a crisis. There's no dramatic moment where it suddenly matters. It's a slow leak, year after year. The gap between what that person knows and what the world now requires widens just a little until one day they find themselves passed over, outpaced, or simply stuck, wondering how they fell so far behind people who, on paper, started with no more talent than they had. Formal education gives you a foundation, but it was never meant to be the whole house. The people who keep building on that foundation for the rest of their lives are the ones who keep expanding what's possible for them, while everyone else's ceiling quietly stays fixed in place. The seventh hidden habit might be the most emotionally draining one on this entire list: holding on to grudges and unresolved resentment. This one is easy to underestimate because it feels justified in the moment. Someone wronged you, someone hurt you, someone let you down, and holding on to that anger can feel like a form of protection or even a form of justice. But here's what's actually happening underneath. Every bit of mental and emotional energy spent replaying old conflicts, rehearsing arguments that already happened, or resenting someone who may not even think about the situation anymore, is energy that isn't available for your own goals, your own relationships, your own present life. Resentment has a strange quality. It convinces you that you're punishing the other person, when in reality, you're often the only one still paying the price. This doesn't mean pretending you weren't hurt or letting people treat you badly without consequence. It means recognizing that carrying old weight indefinitely doesn't protect you. It just slows you down year after year, while the person or situation you're still angry about has often long since moved on. The eighth hidden habit is one that quietly sabotages relationships, careers, and self-image all at once. Negative self-talk that's gone completely unchecked. Most people would never dream of speaking to a friend the way they speak to themselves in their own head. Harsh, critical, quick to highlight every flaw and mistake, slow to acknowledge any progress. And because this voice lives entirely inside your own mind, it goes unchallenged for years, quietly shaping decisions in the background. Someone with a habit of harsh self-talk will often hesitate to pursue an opportunity, not because they lack the ability, but because an internal voice has convinced them they don't deserve it or won't succeed anyway. The tragedy is that this internal narrative usually isn't based on accurate evidence. It's based on old fears, old comparisons, old moments of embarrassment that got stuck on repeat, left unchecked. This habit becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because a person who has been told for years, even by their own mind, that they're not capable, eventually starts acting like it's true. The ninth hidden habit is subtle, but it quietly undermines almost everything else on this list. Living without a written plan. Most people have a general sense of what they want out of life. More freedom, more success, better health, deeper relationships. But a general sense isn't the same as a plan, and the difference matters more than most people realize. A vague wish requires nothing of you today. A written plan, with specific goals and specific timelines, demands a decision every single day about whether your actions are moving you closer to it or further away. Without that structure, life has a way of simply happening to people instead of being built by them. Years drift by, filled with reasonable, defensible choices that never quite added up to the life that vague wish was pointing toward. This is why so many people reach a milestone birthday and feel a wave of unexpected disappointment, not because anything went wrong exactly, but because nothing was ever deliberately steered in the first place. And the 10th hidden habit, the one that ties every other habit on this list together, is this: waiting for the perfect moment to finally start living intentionally. Not next year, once things settle down. Not after the next milestone. Once there's more time or more money or more certainty. Someday. The problem with someday is that it's not a real date. It never arrives on its own. because there will always be a reasonable excuse to push it back just a little further. There will always be a busy season, a complication, a reason this particular moment isn't quite the right one. Meanwhile, the days keep passing at the exact same rate for the person who's waiting as for the person who already started. This hidden habit is the quiet thief that steals more time for more people than almost anything else on this list. Because it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like patience, like waiting for the smart moment instead of acting impulsively. But there's a difference between strategic patience and indefinite postponement. And most people who are honest with themselves already know, somewhere underneath, which one they've actually been practicing. So here's the uncomfortable pattern running underneath all 10 of these habits. Not one of them looks like a crisis from the outside. Nobody watching your life from a distance would say, that person is wasting their life. They're just busy. They're just being careful. They're just staying informed. They're just waiting for the right time. These habits are so widely accepted, so normalized, that they don't even register as a problem to most of the people practicing them or to the people around them. And that's exactly what makes them so much more dangerous than the obvious, dramatic mistakes people usually worry about. A dramatic mistake gets noticed. It creates a crisis, and the crisis forces a response. But a hidden habit, repeated quietly for years, never creates a single moment dramatic enough to force a change. It just slowly, invisibly, redirects an entire life, one unremarkable day at a time, until the gap between where someone is and where they could have been has grown too wide to easily close. Here's what the research on this actually backs up. And it's not just motivational talk. Behavioral scientists who study how habits form have found that small, repeated actions shape identity far more powerfully than occasional big decisions do, because the brain treats repetition as evidence of who you are. Every time you choose busyness over focused work, you're not just losing that hour. You're reinforcing the self-image as someone who stays busy instead of someone who makes progress. Every time you wait for the perfect moment, instead of starting, you reinforce an identity as someone who waits. This is why these hidden habits are so hard to break, simply through willpower alone. They're not just actions. They've become quiet evidence your own mind uses to define who you believe you are. And that's also exactly why replacing them works the same way in reverse. Every small action in the opposite direction, choosing focused work over busy work, choosing to start before you feel ready, choosing to write down a real plan instead of a vague wish, becomes new evidence, slowly rebuilding a different identity underneath. Think about what's actually at stake if these 10 habits go unchecked, not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. The busyness that never becomes progress means goals stay unmet, sometimes permanently. The endless consumption instead of creation means talents that were never developed, ideas that never left someone's head. The chase for comfort over growth means a smaller life than was actually possible, quietly settled for, instead of consciously chosen. The comparison to everyone else's highlight reel means self-worth handed over to a stranger's carefully edited feed. The waiting to feel ready means opportunities that were available and simply never taken. The neglect of self-education means being outpaced by people who never stopped learning. The unresolved resentment means energy drained for years by situations that have long since ended. The unchecked negative self-talk means self-sabotage dressed up as realism. The absence of a written plan means a life that happened by default instead of by design. And the waiting for someday means all of it stretched out indefinitely until someday quietly becomes never. But here's the other side of this, the side that actually matters most. Every single one of these 10 habits can be interrupted, starting today. And it doesn't require a dramatic overhaul of your entire life to begin. It starts the exact same way the habits themselves started. Small, repeated, almost invisible choices, except now pointed in a completely different direction. You don't have to fix all 10 at once. And honestly, trying to would probably backfire. Pick the one that stung the most while you were listening, just now. The one where you thought, that's me. That's exactly what I've been doing. Start there, just that one. Interrupt it today in some small, specific way. Spend 20 minutes creating instead of consuming. Have the conversation you've been avoiding. Write down one real goal with an actual date attached to it. Small as it seems, that single interruption is the first piece of new evidence your mind will use to start building a different identity. The same quiet, compounding way the old habit built the identity you're trying to move away from. Jim Rohn spent his life teaching that the same slow, steady process that builds failure also builds success. It simply pointed in a different direction. Nobody wastes an entire life in a single afternoon, and nobody builds an extraordinary one that way either. It's the accumulation of ordinary days, repeated with either neglect or intention, that eventually adds up to a life you either drifted into or deliberately built. You now know 10 of the most common ways that drift happens, quietly, respectably, without ever looking like a crisis until years have already passed. That knowledge is only useful if something changes because of it. So before you close this out and move on to whatever's next, take 30 seconds, just 30 seconds, and be honest with yourself about which of these 10 habits has quietly had the most control over your life. And then do one small thing today that moves you in the opposite direction. If this video gave you something worth carrying into the rest of your day, hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot more of this coming, and I want you here for it. Your life isn't being wasted by some single catastrophic decision waiting to happen. It's being shaped right now, today, by whichever habits you allow to run on autopilot. The good news is that autopilot can be switched off anytime you decide it's time. That time might as well be now.